Hello, my name's Emma Morris, and I'm a member of the Family Ties team. I'm going to be talking here a little bit about the impact of parental conflict on children. Now, what we know from our experience is that, of course, most parents and carers, they love their children very much. And actually, the last thing they would want to do is to harm their child in any way. However, and very sadly, it is the case that many children are harmed unintentionally by their parents as a result of being exposed to or involved in parental conflict. Now, there's significant evidence that indicates that child exposure to parental conflict is harmful, that it has a negative impact on their well-being. For example, there's evidence that indicates increased anxiety and depression amongst children exposed to parental conflict and increased behavioural difficulties, including aggressive and hostile behaviours. Children exposed to parental conflict often have more significant difficulties in their own interpersonal relationships too, and they experience anxiety around loyalty conflicts. Which parents do they support when their parents are against each other? And cognitive dissonance, when they have two stories or versions about what's right and what's wrong, both from trusted sources. It's very confusing and anxiety provoking for them to try and make sense of that. Finally, there's also evidence to support that these children have greater difficulties with adjustment going forwards in life. And there is also evidence that the negative impact of parental conflict on children is something that they carry forwards with them into their future, in that it negatively impacts on their own life chances through into adulthood in areas from education and employment through to health and mental health and family stability. Exposure to parental conflict can also lead to a breakdown in a parent child relationship, which can be significantly harmful for a child and sometimes even quite traumatic. This isn't always as simple as the fact that maybe one parent has done something wrong or one parent has turned the child against the other parent. Often it's a result of the child being caught in the middle of the parental conflict. And as a result of being put in this position, their loyalty bonds and their attachment systems get activated, which make it more likely that they put themselves alongside one parent at the expense of their relationship with the other parent, which has really sometimes disastrous long-term negative effects for those children. So, for some children, their relationship with one parent can suffer as a result of being exposed to parental conflict. And what can happen if the child is chronically and consistently caught in the middle over time, if they're placed in this position and under this stress for increasing amounts of time and to a high degree, what can happen is that sometimes they can reject the other parent altogether. They can come to demonize or hate the other parent, or sometimes even deny their existence. And this can be, as well, very harmful psychologically for children because obviously children are a product of both their parents and they're aware of that. So if they hate or detest or despise or kind of wipe out one of their parents, essentially they wipe out everything about themselves that comes from that parent. And you can see that the difficulty this may pose for children in terms of their own development, their own identity development, because if they hate one of their parents, they hate the part of themselves that comes from that parent. And what we see in extreme cases is children trying to cut away the part of themselves that comes from that parent or numb that part of themselves with drugs or with alcohol, for example. So, despite all this evidence that exposure to parental conflict can be harmful for children, social awareness of the negative impact of parental conflict as an issue is actually very low. Often, what we tend to see is that people underestimate the harmful impact that parental conflict can have on children. Sometimes, what we hear is parents saying things like, well, we never argue in front of the children. And that makes us think, well, does that mean that your children don't know you're arguing? Or we hear parents say things like, well, we never involve the children in our arguments. And you have to ask, well, does that mean that the children don't know what the arguments involve? It can be very painful because no parent likes to think that they're harming their child. But here, what we ask is that together with your social support, your social network, you think a little bit more carefully about the extent to which your child or children may be exposed to parental conflict. And exposure to parental conflict goes beyond having arguments explicitly in front of the children or directly trying to recruit the children to your cause. It's much more subtle than that. And we ask that no matter how painful it is, that you think together with your social support about how your child may potentially being harmfully affected by exposure to parental conflict, and that you work together with your social network and with the other parent to take responsibility and to commit yourselves to prevent that harm by protecting the child from exposure to and involvement with parental conflict. Now, in this clip, I've talked a lot about there's evidence to support this or research to suggest that, and it would be absolutely fair if some parents or carers wanted to go away and find out a bit more about that research or substantiate it. I've purposefully not put a lot of references throughout this video because it makes it difficult to read and it can be quite distracting. But if you are interested in finding out more about the research, a good place to start is a review that was funded and commissioned by the Department for Work and Pensions and written by the Early Intervention Foundation and the University of Sussex. It's called What Works to Enhance Interpersonal Relationships and Improve Outcomes for Children. The other reference here on this slide is a book written by the Family Ties team at the Anna Freud Centre, and that covers some of the ideas that we've been talking about, and it brings together a lot of the individual references and pieces of research that links harm to children and exposure to parental conflict.